Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Pras.
And it's just us today, Anton. No guests.
It's
Classic.
It's a Just Us League.
That's right. Yeah, yes, that's a good pun. That was clever.
Yeah.
Were you waiting to bring that out?
Yeah, I was waiting for the right opportunity. I think I landed it. So here we are.
Fair enough. We are, of course, now in our fourth season. The listeners would have heard the season premiere last week when we covered Oppenheimer, which we had long promised before, and we finally got round to doing it. This week's film we did tease last week. We are, of course, here to talk about the 1999 remake of The Thomas Crown Affair, which is probably a bit of an unorthodox selection because there are a lot of people who do think quite highly of this film. It is often ranked among the best remakes of all time. Of course, the 1968 version with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway, directed by Norman Jewison, is often regarded as a classic, but this one is not quite on the same level, although it is fondly remembered by those who do like it. But like any remake, it is, of course, slightly polarizing.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's always great to be able to take a look at remakes and then at the same time enter one of my favorite eras, the 90s, particularly the late 90s, and really see what kind of film do we have with the Thomas Crown Affair. And it's got a great star-studded cast. And just by teasing it a little bit, quite a production history that our listeners are going to enjoy.
Before we get into that, I think there's some admin we need to cover because this is some big stuff we're about to talk about. Some of our Spotify listeners may have noticed that they now have the option to donate to our podcast monetarily. That is no coincidence. Thanks to all of you, we're doing well enough that we have become eligible for listener donations. If you like what you hear and you would like to become a supporter, please do so. Every little bit helps.
What a milestone. And just, Pat, I'm sure you join me in just saying thank you to our listeners for helping us get here. Like this is huge.
We would have never gotten here if it wasn't for the support and the feedback that we've gotten thus far. We're now in our fourth season. The chances of us getting here were apparently quite slim, less than 10% according to the odds. But that's if you play the odds, which we don't. And, in general, as always, if you are a new listener and you like what you hear, please give us a like, a follow, or a subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you happen to be listening to this on Apple Podcasts and you would like to give us a 5-star review, we really would appreciate it. Those reviews on Apple count for a lot. We'll even read your review aloud on our next recording. How about that?
Yeah, so we didn't put any stipulations there, so you could literally write anything and we'll read it. So,
as long as it's a 5-star review.
As long as it's a 5-star review.
Exactly.
So please throw it out there. And again, thank you so much for your support. We just love what we do, and it's just so much fun for us, and appreciate having all of our listeners and subscribers along for the ride.
We love this so much. We're not even really getting paid very much for it yet.
Yeah. But we do this for the passion of it. Isn't that right, Pat?
I love doing this. It's been a blast so far.
All right. Well, so bored billionaire Thomas Crown decides to entertain himself by stealing a Monet painting from the Met when Catherine Banning, an investigator for the museum's insurance company, takes an interest in Crown. A complicated back-and-forth game with romantic undertones begins between them. Released on August 6, 1999 by Irish Dreamtime, United Artists, and MGM. Directed by John McTiernan, screenplay by Leslie Dixon and Kurt Wimmer, based on the screenplay to the 1968 film, starring Pierce Brosnan, Rene Russo, Dennis Leary, Fritz Weaver, Frankie R. Faison, Ben Gazzara, Esther Kenyatis, and Mark Margolis. With a budget of $48 million, so $88 million adjusted for inflation, with a box office of $124 million, $228 million adjusted for inflation. So, Pat, why was this movie chosen? You kind of touched on a little bit around the background as we introed the episode, but why the Thomas Crown Affair?
Well, this is a bit of a romance film, and this episode is going to be airing on Valentine's Day. And it was on our list, so I decided to fast track it for this week because not only of the timing, I think it's just a fun remake to talk about. It did well when it was released in 1999, and of course, 1999 is often regarded as one of, if not the best movie years ever. Pierce Brosnan, who is the star of the show here for more ways than one, which we'll get into, he was at the absolute peak of his career at this point. This came out a few months before his third outing as James Bond, The World Is Not Enough. And he really was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. As the listeners know, at this point, we like to talk about James Bond movies. And since we're covering the Bond series mostly in release order, it's going to be quite a while before we get to the Brosnan era. But full disclosure, I really like him as James Bond. The quality of the 4 films that he was in were not all equal, let's just say. But I always liked him as James Bond. He was, of course, the James Bond that I grew up with as a kid, meaning he was the new Bond when I was a kid and I first got into the series, So I do have a lot of nostalgia for his work. And then Rene Russo, she was a big star in the 90s too. And then, of course, we have the director, John McTiernan, who was already a legend by the time that he directed this. His participation would have been a huge deal in 1999. But the reason I just really wanted to cover this is because this is a film that has grown on me over the years. I saw this at some point after 1999 when it was on HBO or one of those cable channels. And I was really, frankly, quite bored by it, just like I was bored by the original. This is a movie made by adults for adults, and it has always grown on me over the years. I always thought quite highly of it, and I was always surprised to learn that it is polarizing, but it shouldn't be, right? Because just like with any remake, you're always going to get the fans of the original who don't care for the remake. So that's why I wanted to cover it.
Nice. I mean, I feel like you touched on all of like the kind of the core elements of the film that I also that also resonate with me. I think I'm going to think about that statement around 1999 being a big year for films, and I'm going to go ahead and not take offense because Shrek was released in 2001. So,
well, 2001 was a very good year too.
Yes, it was.
But I mentioned the 1999 thing just because there's been so much content written about it and published about it for the 20th anniversary, right, back in 2019. And I think there is a lot of evidence to back up that theory, right? You look at a lot of the films that came out that year, which we'll mention some of them later, and it's a long list of great stuff.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Quick bit for the listeners. I have some history with this film, right? I've seen it a handful of times over the years. You had never seen it before. I asked you to do this with me. You hadn't seen the original either, right?
No, I had not. So what's fun with that is, I went in blind. I didn't look up anything around the plot. I didn't read any reviews, and I watched Thomas Crown Affair. And I'll go into a bit more how I felt about it, but definitely a fun experience to go and experience a movie for the first time like that. And then afterwards, I also saw the original, which in itself had a very different vibe, but you could see exactly where there was the inspiration for the remake. But overall, like both from very different eras of film, but I can see why the formula, or at least like the makeup of the film, was very enticing for producers.
Yeah, definitely. And even this film, right, I would describe this as very much of the era. I think it's aged well, but it is also the type of film that they would probably not make this the way that they made this in 1999 today.
It still has, and we'll talk about this a little bit more around maybe like the pacing, right?
Yeah.
It still feels, it's really interesting too, because when you even think about the original film and like any of my thoughts around the pacing there, it's just movie trends.
Slow.
movie trends change over
Yeah.
time, and what may have
Well,
felt
we don't have to bury the
yeah,
lead. I
yeah,
think both of us agree on
yeah,
this. We find the original slow. It's a slow
right,
movie.
right. But like even then, over with the improved pacing in the '90s for the 1999 version, it was an improvement. But for today's watchers, it's probably still going to feel a little slow.
I agree with that. Where are you at on Brosnan as James Bond? Did you enjoy him, or
Uh,
because he has plenty of detractors?
Very similarly, I grew up with him as my first James Bond, in the '90s, so definitely have a very soft spot for that. Because also I used Pierce Brosnan, or I played Pierce Brosnan in GoldenEye on the N64. Definitely a very strong attachment.
Yeah,
And I think the only thing that is the knock is I'm always going to see him as the intruding almost stepdad in Mrs. Doubtfire. So I'm trying not to hold that against him. But I think Pierce Brosnan is just a stand-up guy. Every single interview that I've seen with him, he is just a fantastic human being. Every person that he's been on set with only has amazing things to say about him, and it's been interesting to see like a slight revival in the past few years as he's popped up in a few more things. Which for a bit of time, it almost felt like he'd retired, but he was recently in a few things for Netflix, and so it's
yeah,
cool to see Brosnan, back in the saddle.
yeah. He's had a pretty good career post Bond. He's been in some really good stuff. I don't want to get too much into the discussion about him related to James Bond because this episode is not about a Bond movie, but I do want to bring up the fact that, and I will elaborate more on this if I remember to when
Mhm.
we eventually get to the films of his era, but he does not get enough credit, I think, for actually saving James Bond.
Ooh, that's a really good call out. But just like with any handing off the torch, there is a lot of decision making that goes into how do we transition this successfully. And I guess we have to be very thankful that it was Pierce Brosnan.
You have to look at it like this. After License to Kill did not do well at the box office in 1989, there was a very long legal battle over the distribution rights between Eon Productions and their parent company, MGM. There's a bit more to it than that, but I'll spare you the details for now. So there was a 6-year hiatus between films. Dalton ended up bowing out of the role. Re-enter Brosnan, who was
Hmm.
originally supposed to get the role after Roger Moore in 1986, but Remington Steele wouldn't let him out of his contract, and that's how Timothy Dalton ended up getting the role of Bond. So they bring Brosnan back at that point. He hadn't really been in any box office hits. Remington Steele was like the thing that he was most known for, and that was not even a TV show in England. It was an American only. So they
Hmm.
basically bring in a TV actor to play Bond who hasn't been in a movie in 6 years. The Cold War is over. There's all these conversations about, is this guy even going to be still relevant in a post-Cold War world? Most people just assumed the series was over. And Brosnan comes in with GoldenEye and proves that not only can Bond succeed post-Cold War, he can thrive. And I often think Brosnan sometimes gets a bad rap for how his tenure ended with Die Another Day, but he deserves a little bit more credit than he gets for how important he was to maintaining the legacy of James Bond.
Well, I think that one thing that isn't arguable is that Pierce Brosnan has made quite an impact as James Bond, whether you like him, whether you love him or you don't. He has his place as definitely an icon within like James Bonds across history. But with that, this film itself is not a James Bond film, right?
It's not. Although you will often hear that this is the best James Bond movie that Pierce Brosnan was in. And I think it is a very interesting take. But regarding this film, the other guy I wanted to talk about, John McTiernan. We
Ooh.
mentioned he was a legend by the time this film came out, right? He would go from the absolute highest peak of filmmaking to one of the most spectacular falls from grace in probably the history of Hollywood, right?
With some pretty wacky stuff.
Unbelievable. So he makes in a row Predator, Die Hard, Hunt for Red October, just three
Yeah.
bangers, right? Three amazing movies. All three of those are
Mhm.
classics. He has a couple stinkers in there. Last Action Hero,
Mhm.
He did a movie with Sean Connery called Medicine Man, not very good. But then he makes Die Hard with a Vengeance. That's pretty good. Unfortunately for McTiernan, it was all downhill after this film came out in 1999. He had a very uneven year, to say the least. The Thomas Crown Affair would be the last quality film that he ever made. Just 3 weeks later, I had forgotten this. Another film that he mostly directed was released called The 13th Warrior.
That's a pretty bad film.
Have you've seen it?
Oh yeah, I've seen it. That is a pretty bad film.
I don't remember much about it, but I will tell you this. It is one of the biggest box office bombs of all time, with losses up to reported $129 million, and that's in 1999 money.
It's tough
Yeah.
because it is an adaptation of a Michael Crichton novel.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I say McTiernan mostly directed it because apparently Michael Crichton was brought in to direct some of the films after McTiernan was dismissed or something.
But starring Antonio Banderas, it's a bit of a far cry compared to Banderas truly shining as Zorro.
That's right. Zorro's an awesome movie, directed by Martin Campbell, who directed GoldenEye and Casino Royale. Bang, there's our connection.
It all comes together.
Yeah, Hollywood, it's a smaller community than you think. Oh, by the way, Anton, 13th Warrior is on our list. We will have to cover it at some point. So you're going to have to watch it again. I don't remember anything about it. I saw it back in the day, and I couldn't tell you a thing about it.
Well,
but McTiernan's career, it never recovered after that. He would direct 2 more films, neither of which did well. The Rollerball remake is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And then he directed something called Basic with John Travolta, which I haven't seen. And then here's where it gets real bad for him.
Yeah.
In 2006, he pled guilty to perjury and lying to an FBI investigator in regard to his hiring of a private investigator named Anthony Pellicano in late 2000 to illegally wiretap the phone calls of 2 people, one of whom was Charles Roven, a co-producer of the Rollerball remake. McTiernan ended up serving almost a year in federal prison, and he ended up filing for bankruptcy. He has not directed a film since.
Like, there's so much there around one Rollerball. How often do we get to think about that travesty of a film?
We don't.
But
the original's pretty cool.
The original was definitely different. You could see why they wanted to adapt it for the modern times.
Yeah. The problem is when your lead actor is Chris Klein, I don't know. I don't know who's getting excited for that.
Well, so it's a little tough just because it was also reaching kind of that level of the early 2000s of like what is cool, and it was kind of like this hyper realistic future aesthetic that also had a lot of leather, and of course you get all
LL Cool J.
You get all these really weird images for Rollerball. If there are any younger listeners that have never seen this film, just Google it and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. It almost looked like they were, I'd say they were the X-Men with their casual clothes for the Friday evening.
Yeah, if you ever want to waste 90 minutes of your life, watch the Rollerball remake.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because, again, Chris Klein didn't prove to be a strong lead actor in Hollywood, but hey, he had his place in the American.
Kidding me? He's the charisma of a baked potato.
But he had his place in the American Pie films.
He's right up there with Hayden Christensen and Garrett Hedlund in terms of charisma for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Ugh, Garrett Hedlund. Oof, gave me chills.
I had to bring him up for you. But yeah, like I said, this is one of the best remakes ever, I think. Here's a few other ones that I would put on the list, right? John Carpenter's The Thing, Ocean's 11, Cape Fear, True Grit, The Fly, Scarface, The Italian Job. If you really want to get into some old school Hollywood examples, the famous version of Ben-Hur, that's a remake. The 1954 version of A Star is Born, and believe it or not, The Wizard of Oz, the one that everyone knows, that is technically a remake. I've never seen the original, so whatever. But
so I have a couple I want to add there. The Magnificent Seven. So a lot of people may not know that's actually a remake of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai.
Great one.
And then one more I just want to add, Fistful of Dollars. I bet you didn't know that was also an adaptation of an Akira Kurosawa film, Yojimbo.
No, I didn't know that.
Listeners probably know by now I'm a big Akira Kurosawa film. The man was a genius. And if you see the original films and compare it to these Westerns, it's pretty clear that they were remakes.
I can use this as an opportunity to hate on Max.
Oh, there we go.
Because at one point, almost all of Kurosawa's stuff was on HBO Max, and I don't think it is anymore.
It was a pretty amazing time. I remember that.
Let's talk about the production history of the Thomas Crown Affair, because we just kind of rambled there, but I feel like it was a healthy ramble.
I agree.
So the production history of the Thomas Crown Affair. The idea of doing a remake of the 1968 version, it had probably floated around for quite a bit, but this specific remake was conceived by none other than Pierce Brosnan himself and his producing partner, Beau St. Clair. They had founded their own production company called Irish Dreamtime, and this ended up being their second project. The two of them produced the film. That's a pretty cool bit about this film that I had forgotten, is Pierce Brosnan, he co-developed this film and ended up co-producing it.
Pretty neat.
And I have to say, wanting to remake a Steve McQueen movie takes some serious balls. You got to have a lot of confidence to remake something that McQueen did, because McQueen's known as the king of cool, and he really was cool. What a legendary performer.
Right. I mean, just to quickly touch on Steve McQueen for our younger listeners,
they have to know Steve McQueen, right?
I mean, we don't want to make assumptions. If think of like the hottest, biggest action star of today, triple it, and that was Steve McQueen in his heyday.
Yeah, stuff like Bullet, The Getaway, The Great Escape, The Towering Inferno, which we're going to be covering later this season. He was in a lot of good stuff. He died way too young. He was only 50 when he died. I think the closest comparison physically would be Daniel Craig.
Yep,
and I would say some of Daniel Craig's style choices in Quantum of Solace are clearly channeling Steve McQueen, and I say that in a good way. I was very pleased to see that.
And it's funny, I just mentioned earlier The Magnificent Seven, of course, starring Steve McQueen.
That's right. That's a good one. I forgot that one. Yeah, he was in a bunch of stuff, man.
Yeah.
He really died way too young. Apparently, he was an asshole in real life, but we're just here to talk about the films.
There's a lot of great classic actors that kind of had that same notoriety.
I feel like if you wanted to avoid talking about assholes in Hollywood on a movie podcast, you wouldn't have much of a podcast.
No. But hey, big personalities make for great acting, maybe?
He was certainly a great actor. Papillon, too. There's another great Steve McQueen performance.
Classic film.
And, The Sand Pebbles. His only Oscar nomination was for his performance in The Sand Pebbles, starring our friend Mako.
Yes, that's true.
That's right. We're just busting out the connections today. We're talking about everything but this film. Back to the Thomas Crown Affair remake. John McTiernan was the first choice to direct, but he was initially unavailable. Brosnan and his fellow producers considered several other directors, including Mike Newell, Andrew Davis, and Roger Donaldson, before McTiernan's schedule freed up and he was able to take the job. So once he was hired, McTiernan began adding his own ideas to the story. He changed the theme of the central heist in a number of key scenes. Apparently, the original screenplay was like much closer to the original film, and one of the first things McTiernan did was make major changes to the story. Feeling strongly that audiences would be less sympathetic to a protagonist staging armed bank robberies, as Steve McQueen had done in the original, he changed Thomas Crown to an art thief, and I can say this was a masterful decision on his part.
A+ decision.
It's probably the most important and the best thing going for this film is that he is not a bank robber. He's just a guy that steals art.
It wouldn't land the same way if he was a bank robber.
Definitely not. McTiernan wrote the opening heist based on the Trojan horse theme and on a technical failure of thermal cameras. McTiernan also deemed a polo match that was used in the original and had been rewritten into the new script to be far too cliched, and he wanted a scene that conveyed more action and excitement, not just wealth. So he substituted a catamaran race, in which Brosnan performed his own stunts. Originally, an elaborate 30-page sequence of the theft of the final painting was planned, although McTiernan removed this in favor of a simple, mystified response by Dennis Leary's character when asked how it was taken. Cinematographer Tom Priestley Jr. replaced Erickson Core 8 days into shooting, and filming took place in several parts of New York City, including Central Park. The Met refused permission for the interior to be used in the film, so the filmmakers used the New York Public Library a few blocks away for many interior scenes, and a soundstage for the rest. The exterior of the Met was shown several times with permission from New York City.
This was something that actually I remember messaging Pat about because I was convinced that it was the interior of the Met. I couldn't believe how they actually had done that. So, shouts out.
They did a wonderful job of recreating the inside of the Met because They got a lot of little details right.
Having been, quite a few times myself, I was pretty convinced they were inside.
Yeah. And that, I think, you know what, that's a really good example of production design that we often don't talk about. I feel like people often talk about production design on fantasy films, sci-fi films,
Mhm.
stuff where the sets are very outland, like we talk about Ken Adams' work on the Bond series a lot.
Right.
But often production design is not always supposed to be something that you notice. It's often it's supposed to feel very natural.
Right, like, can you create a sound stage that actually looks like a bar and naturally feels like a bar that'll surprise people is actually just a sound stage.
Right.
So great attention to detail and, part of that movie magic that, we appreciate as, film lovers.
Indeed. The corporate headquarters of Lucent Technology stood in for Crown's suite of offices, and Lucent were the manufacturers of the catamaran that Crown is later seen racing.
The glider scenes were shot at Ridge Soaring Gliderport in Eagle Field in Pennsylvania and at Corning Painted Post Airport in New York, located at the National Soar Museum in Elmira, New York. Shouts out Elmira, New York. The idea of unusual heat in the museum rendering thermal cameras useless came from director John McTiernan's Predator. In that movie, McTiernan's thermal cameras began to fail when the jungle temperature broke 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so 32 degrees Celsius. The dark green Shelby Mustang that Crown drives on Martinique was originally intended to be used for Arnold Schwarzenegger's character in Last Action Hero, another McTiernan film, and was retrieved from the McTiernan's garage for this film. Crown's watch is a Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso, but the logo doesn't appear because at the time, Pierce Brosnan had an exclusive deal with Omega Watches due to him being, of course, James Bond.
Shout out Omega.
Shout out Omega. We're still here. We know you
Yep,
can
we're
hear
still
us.
available for a sponsorship. Let us know.
So, due to a rumored clause in his James Bond contract, Brosnan was forbidden from wearing a full tuxedo in another film. In the ballroom scene, he is without a tie, and his collar is unbuttoned. And in January 2007, it was announced that a sequel would be a loose remake of the 1964 film Top Cappy. Brosnan even stated that Paul Verhoeven would be directing. Angelina Jolie and Charlize Theron were rumored to be in it, but by 2013, Brosnan admitted that the project was stuck in developmental hell. In the April 2014 edition of Empire, John McTiernan revealed that he had written a script for the sequel while in prison called Thomas Crown and the Missing Lioness. In 2016, Michael B. Jordan had approached Metro Goldwyn Mayer to pitch a new adaptation of the story with hopes of starring in the lead role.
Just say MGM.
MGM.
Just
Yeah,
redo that
I was
sentence.
gonna say everyone knows it's the lion. It's the lion. It's the lion one. Okay. It's not the lady holding the torch. It's the lion one. By April 2023, after previously acquiring MGM, Amazon announced plans to reshoot the franchise with a new feature film in development through the company's Amazon Studios. So,
Last I heard, that is
yep,
somewhat moving forward in some
yep,
form.
read that as well. Michael B. Jordan, definitely interesting lead. We'll see how this develops.
I laughed at the thing about McTiernan writing a script in prison.
I think I laughed more at the title of the sequel, Thomas Crown
And
and
the
the
yeah,
Missing Lioness. It sounds like a children's book.
it does. Also, a Paul Verhoeven sequel would have been hilarious because at some point there would have been a character machine gunned to death.
Ooh, I feel like it's interesting also when we kind of consider with Amazon now owning MGM. Again, it's just another connection to Bond, isn't it? That Amazon also holds a distribution rights for the Bond series.
Yeah.
So again, we're making lots of connections today.
Yeah, we are. I think it's time to talk about why it wasn't better.
There we go.
Number one reason is the characters. Some of the criticism you will read about this film is that the two main characters don't have good chemistry. And I have a quote here from CNN's Paul Tatara. Quote, Brosnan and Russo do virtually nothing but sashay around, trying to out-sophisticate each other. It's like you're watching two models slap each other with fashion magazines. They also perform the stupid movie Mambo by choosing to have sex on top of a hardwood furniture when there's a bed nearby, end quote. I don't know what film this guy watched. Their chemistry is electric.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that take. I mean, it's actually, there's Offset. There were offset, there was actually so much respect between Brosnan and Russo. Just even seeing an interview with Russo, just commenting on just how great of a fellow actor Brosnan was, and just how generous he was on set. So I feel like that translating really well for them in the film. I thought their chemistry was amazing.
I think most people would agree with this on this. I mean, this is some of the best I've seen in a film like this, right?
Oh, a
I think
100%.
it really helps that they're of similar age. They absolutely got that right. I think Brosnan was 46 at the time this came out, and Russo was about the same age.
That was actually, something that I also read was Brosnan requesting that they age up a bit for the lead, for the female lead, because originally it was written to be someone younger. So I think that very intentionally, bringing in Russo, I think again just adds to how great that chemistry was.
Yeah, all of their dialogue together feels very natural. When she first introduced herself to him, when
Hmm.
he's generously donated the what is it, the Pizarro portrait to the museum, and they're getting a drink together,
Hmm.
and she kind of catches him off guard. She immediately lets him know. She's like, "I know you stole this painting, and I'm going to catch you." And then they go
Yep.
to dinner. It's all great stuff. There's some great dialogue when he says to her, "I'm sure your files are thicker than mine."
It's interesting to think about their chemistry in the film, and then of course tabloids. I didn't read anything about any speculation around dating on set. Is that anything that you saw on your end doing research for the film?
Nothing like that. They were
Yeah.
both happily married at the time.
There's one film that comes to mind when I think of like two leads that had very strong chemistry, and that actually translated to a little bit of a dramatic romance on set. And of course, that was Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, I mean that unfortunately broke up a marriage.
Yeah, so it was definitely not a wholesome chemistry.
No, but I mean, what I know about Brosnan is that he has always been extremely professional about these types of things. He's there to
Yes.
work and nothing else, no matter how convincing it looks on screen. And it does look convincing on screen. To
Yep.
your point, if you had told me that they were a real couple, I would have believed you.
Yeah, no, and just doubling down on what you said, like, I touched on it earlier. Everything that Rene Russo said is that Brosnan was just nothing but professional, amazing to work with. And I mean, even just watching the film, I mean, Brosnan as Thomas Crown, how could you? He just seems like such a nice guy.
Yes, he does. I will say his character comes across as very arrogant, but he's so charming that he gets away with it.
Hmm.
I would say, what's the term? Brimming with confidence,
Yes.
swagger, if you will. When they're at dinner at Cipriani, and he
Hmm.
says, "May I ask you a very personal question? Would you like another hit of espresso?" And she's like, "That's it? That's your question?" He's like, "Yep, that's as good as it gets."
But then later, when he follows up and says, "How can I answer your question if you won't seriously answer if you'd like another hit of espresso?"
Exactly. Oh,
Like
it's
it's
really good stuff. They are
they're
just playing with each other.
their back and forth is just so much fun.
It's one of those things where like they're so photogenic and they have such good chemistry that they could honestly say anything to each other and they would be able to sell it, but the dialogue just happens to be well written enough that it's just a bonus.
So something that we touched on, how much of a great decision it was that instead of a bank robbery, they went with a heist at the Met. And I feel like that is actually just allows Brosnan to really fully display his charisma, his charm for like almost like a gentlemanly like thief crime. And I'm sure you'll agree with me. We really do see Brosnan and just like his talents at like on full display.
Oh, completely. He looks completely comfortable as a rich, thrill-seeking billionaire playboy. He was born for this part. Like I said, arrogant but charming. You want him to get away with everything, right? If you're watching this for this first time, which you were, wouldn't
Mhm.
you have been disappointed if he got caught?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the film does a great job of being able to portray him as, arrogant but confident, a thief, but a gentleman. And it wasn't hard to root for him.
And to your point, he participates in the actual painting heist in the beginning, right?
Hmm.
You think he's just a passive player in it. Like you know that he's involved because of the way it's edited, but you're not quite sure what he's going to do. How's he going to team up with these guys that are breaking into the museum? And then you realize he's not teaming up with them at all. He's playing them. They're a distraction for him.
Right.
to make
Eh,
his move. And that's very different than the opening heist of the original, where Crown doesn't even participate in the bank heist, right? He just picks
mhm.
the cash up. There's not much of a payoff.
I think this is just speaks to how well Brosnan plays the character. But an important aspect of Thomas Crown is that he's not doing it for the money. And I feel like with Brosnan, you really get that. He really displayed like he's going through the motions with his day to day, but when he seeks adventure, that's where his excitement in life is. And so I felt like Brosnan executed that perfectly.
And that's why the bank heist thing in the original, it was a weakness to me, because it's like, okay, he's already rich. He's stealing
Right.
money. Why?
Right.
But the art thing makes perfect sense, right? Because they reveal later on that he had bid on that Monet painting and he couldn't get it. And then this was his way of getting it. To your point, it's not about the money, which he tells her later.
Hmm. I mean, you
I do
can.
agree with that, saying that this is the best Bond movie that Brosnan was in. Like, I understand where that's coming from. I'm not saying that I like this better than GoldenEye, but this really is the best use of Pierce Brosnan that's ever happened. He is perfect for the role. Suave, handsome. You completely buy him as a billionaire. He steals art in his free time. It's equal parts James Bond and Remington Steele, right? His two most famous roles. It's no wonder that he nails this.
Now, of course, like in the literal sense, there's a bit missing that it's not quite a Bond film, but he plays a Bond character, right?
Right. He
Because,
plays it like
yeah,
he plays Bond, like he played Bond,
yes,
right? Suave, charming,
charming, yes,
sophisticated.
absolutely.
And this is something I caught on the last rewatch. His character is mentioned as being from Glasgow. And I found that to be a curious choice, because you would have thought Brosnan would have used an opportunity to showcase his native Irish accent. But for whatever reason, he must have had say over this, right? Because he was, co-producer of the film. He basically developed it, but they kept the character as being originally Scottish. Thought that
Yeah,
was interesting.
but didn't he use that accent in Jest at the end of the film?
He did, and if you remember when they're eating dinner, he even tells what's Rene Russo's character, Catherine Banning. He tells her
Mhm.
like the hardest part was learning how to talk.
That's right.
It just stood out to me. I'm like, that's interesting. Like, why make him Scottish? There's no reason. In an interview he gave about this film's release, Brosnan said that being Bond gave him a lot of creative power in Hollywood. You can really tell this was really the peak of his career, right? Because he's James Bond in the same year that this comes out. He's in his third Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, in 1999, right? So he had like solidified himself as that generation's James Bond. And then he chooses to just go off and make this project. And it's interesting. He was doing what Sean Connery wanted to do in the 60s, but what the Bond series wasn't allowing him to do. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why Connery ended up leaving the role. I found the parallel to that amusing.
Very interesting.
Look, Anton, I'm not advocating stealing art. But what I am telling you is that it is definitely cooler than robbing a bank. Stealing art is just cool in this film. I'm not endorsing the stealing of art.
But again, it play like we touched on it. It's fantastic decision for the film.
Oh yeah. It's probably the best decision that McTiernan made regarding this film. Because I do think this is a very well directed film. All of the set pieces work. But that is a storytelling decision that McTiernan gets credit for. And I think that makes or breaks this.
Yes.
This would have been just far well, I mean, they nailed it, right? When they made the decision. This would have been far less sympathetic if he had been just a arranger of bank heists.
Plus, just like kind of the idea of having the movie play out the way it does, even the reveal of how he put the painting back. I mean, it all
It's
just
brilliant.
adds. It all just adds to just how classy he is, just how confident he is, and just it's fantastic.
One of the reasons the plot works too is there's no mystery to it, but it manages to succeed. Like within minutes, you know who Thomas Crown is, you know what he's doing. The entire thing hinges on the cat and mouse game between the two leads.
Mm-hmm. And a bit of that is will she, won't she, like join him?
Right.
That's the fun. That's the fun in it.
I liked his clothes in this. A lot of
Agree.
suits. I thought he was wearing Brioni, who also supplied the suits for his Bond movies, but I looked it up and it's some other tailor. But nonetheless, you get the same vibe.
And also not just Brosnan's outfits. It was his ward's outfit with a full on like diamond necklace neck thing. remember from
Yeah.
or even Renee's Russo's outfits. I feel like there wasn't anything that necessarily stood out as that's too 90s. I thought it was all just very nice.
No. No, it's all aged really well. The only thing maybe you could say is people don't or men don't wear as much French blue dress shirts as they do now. That was a very 90s thing, but I think it's aged in a nice way.
Absolutely.
And considering he couldn't wear Omega, you could do worse than a Jaeger Reverso.
You could, like a
You could
Swatch
do worse.
watch. Like a Swatch watch.
Yes. Nothing against Swatch, but it
Yeah.
ain't Jaeger.
Yeah. I mean, no disrespect, Swatch, if you wanted to
Yeah.
sponsor us.
Speaking of Rene Russo, she matches him in every way. She's smart, she's witty, she's sexy. She manages to take over the investigation without being too condescending to Dennis Leary or the other cops. There's a classiness to her that's not easy to pull off. We mentioned how her and Brosnan were of similar age. That suits the film really well. It's just a great performance. It's probably my favorite Rene Russo performance. Or Get Shorty.
Well, I mean,
Pick one.
we talked about, before the recording, Rene Russo had quite the career, right? And especially this point in the 90s.
Yeah, this was kind of the last big hit that she was in. Starting with Major League in '89, she was just in a lot of really successful, like high profile stuff, right? Like Lethal Weapon 3 and 4. She's in a movie called Free Jack, which is absolutely hilarious if you ever get a chance to see it. Mick Jagger's in it. It's terrible, but it's funny.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a science fiction movie starring Anthony Hopkins and Mick Jagger.
Sign me up.
It ain't great, but it's memorable. She was in the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood, which was a great movie, and where Malkovich plays the assassin. She's in Major League 2. She's in that movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman,
I remember that one.
which I enjoyed. She's in Get Shorty, which is a great performance in a great movie. Tin Cup with Kevin Costner. She's in Ransom with Mel Gibson, which is awesome. Just a lot of good stuff. A better career than I remembered for her. And then, of course, you brought this up. She capped it off with her contribution to the MCU, playing Thor's mother. And it's a really good role in especially the second Thor movie, which is a terrible film. And she is one of the highlights of it.
Yeah, and I mean, very important character, really brought a lot of heart, especially when she returned as the character in Endgame. I thought, Rene Russo's bringing her A game to the Endgame.
Very satisfying to see her in that. And I almost forgot to mention Nightcrawler. She's good in that. And I didn't know this until I was doing the research for this film. That is written and directed by her husband, Dan Gilroy.
Very interesting fact.
This is the best use of Pierce Brosnan. It's also the best use of Dennis Leary.
Dennis Leary. What
I really like him in this.
Interesting career. Been in all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, good career. This is a role that suits him. He's completely believable as a New York cop, right? He has that real. What's the show he was in? Rescue Me, where he plays a firefighter.
He plays the firefighter.
Same type of performance, right? He's channeling that energy. It's really good because it's a serious role, but he gets to use his sarcasm in a really good way. He could have easily been a stupid character in this, but he's not. It's a well-written part. He has a personality. I really like how he sort of hits on Rene Russo in the beginning, but after he realizes that she's not into him at all, he just starts giving her shit in like a friendly way. And he's just a guy doing his job, right? And
right.
I really like him in this movie.
And you actually see a lot of... there are a lot of characters just like this for Dennis Leary in terms of very likable, but seems like kind of rough around the edges. But at the end of the day, heart of gold, someone that's like a friendly and like someone that's relatable, especially when I think about roles like you just said, Rescue Me.
This is the type of role that he could have been written as the antagonist, but they don't do that.
No, he wasn't like the traditional like hard-nosed cop trying to pin Thomas Crown or trying to pin Rene Russo.
What's your favorite Dennis Leary role? Do you have one?
That's kind of an easy one. It's got to be Diego from Ice Age.
Okay. That's a good one. I wasn't expecting you to go there, but that's a good one.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, there's a lot out there. He was really good in Rescue Me. In terms of films,
yeah. Have you ever seen The Ref?
Yes, Ref, really good.
I think that's my favorite Leary performance. It's pretty great in that movie.
I have to admit, there was a really, really bad like 98 like kids movie that had Dennis Leary in it. I don't know if you remember Small Soldiers.
I know that movie, yeah.
Yeah, pretty freaking terrible. Don't watch it.
It's not good. And then, of course, Dennis Leary's character in this film, he would eventually get promoted to captain, and then he ended up getting tragically killed by the lizard in that Spider-Man incident.
Yeah, that was tough.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
Yeah, but he really still made sure to show his support to that Spider-Man fella.
Yeah. I like Leary and Frankie Faison as partners.
Mm-hmm.
I like all their stuff together. It's just well written, well acted. You can tell they were getting along on set and just having a good time.
It's interesting. The film doesn't have a huge cast, but I feel like the cast together has really great chemistry.
It just seems like one of those movies where everyone was getting along on set and having a good time. Like I don't know if that's true, but that was my takeaway from watching this. Like to your point, not a lot of characters. So all of them, they all have to do their part, right? No, there can't really be a weak link, and there isn't one here. What do you think of Faye Dunaway's role as the psychiatrist?
Especially after seeing the first film, it's just a fun little cameo. I don't
Yeah.
think that I don't think it felt at all forced. It was nice. I thought it was a
No.
good little bit into seeing more around like Thomas Crown.
Yeah, I felt like you could have cut all of her scenes and it wouldn't really matter, but I enjoyed seeing her in the film. Knowing what you know about Faye Dunaway, she probably tried to talk herself into doing more. Like, do you need me to play the police captain? Like, no, we're good, Faye, thanks. This is also, Anton, to me, an underrated New York movie. I really like this as a New York movie.
And I love on-set filming.
Oh, and there is a ton of on-set filming. They didn't film much on the soundstage, you can tell.
Yeah.
I love the look and feel of like turn of the millennium New York City, and this really hits a sweet spot for me.
Mm-hmm.
Crown's brownstone, that is just the stuff of dreams.
It's just so amazing just because
So cool.
these are the kind of films that like, I shared it before. Like I grew up on the West Coast, never didn't visit New York until, I was an adult. So my perception of New York was films like this. Not I didn't see this film as a kid, but this would have just added to that the beauty that is New York. And I feel like this film did an amazing job capturing that beauty.
It did. You get some really good Met stuff. You get great restaurant scenes. You get skyscraper stuff. You get unconventional New York stuff like the boat racing on the Hudson River. You get the skyline in the background. And it was a complete coincidence at the time, but I have eaten at Cipriani with my wife, and I have eaten lamb chops there of all things. But I did not order the Krug Grand Cuvée champagne, which cost like $200 a bottle. So I didn't get the full Thomas Crown experience when I was there.
Did you have espresso?
I don't think so.
Got it.
I don't think so. I say it was a coincidence because we ate there without knowing the connection to this film. And like on the latest rewatch, I was like, no way, Cipriani.
It also doesn't seem like the kind of place that would have Pierce Brosnan like a picture of Pierce Brosnan on the wall autographed.
No. It's not that kind of place at all. It was not cheap, I can tell you that, but it is very good.
Okay.
I think there's Cipriani's all over the place. I think there's one in Vegas if you're ever interested.
Well,
yeah,
shouts out Cipriani.
Yes, I didn't even know if that's how you pronounce it. I was probably pronouncing it wrong the entire time, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. Speaking of other locations, man, McTiernan knows how to use them. Like all the glider stuff in upstate New York, it just looks amazing. It's filmed so well. And then Martinique, you don't see that in movies often. Pretty cool Caribbean location, right? Like when's the last time you saw Martinique in a movie?
Can't say often.
All of the touches from McTiernan, I think, it's real good stuff, right? I even like the opening credits when they're slowly zooming in on the city, starting with like that satellite view. And you get the letters are switching in the words. Pretty cool stuff. I read that they changed the ending from like something of a downer, like it originally ended with her alone on the dock, maybe holding the painting, to the happier ending that we got.
Right.
Of course, the original ends with her alone.
But with the remake, with the remake, Rene Russo threatening to break Pierce Brosnan's arms.
Yes. I don't know about that line, but that was a little okay. Interesting.
Interesting line to end it on.
Yeah, I read that it was a reference to the Son of Man painting that's featured prominently in the film. You know, the guy with the bowler hat?
Right.
Apparently his arms are twisted backwards, which I never noticed, but that's what it's apparently referencing. Sure. Yeah, why not?
It was still a little weird.
What'd you think of the set pieces?
Oh my gosh. It's amazing what they were what they were able to execute with this film. Set pieces included, very intentional, great detail. I'm sure you'd agree.
100%. And it's interesting how, McTiernan, he made his bones as an action director, right? But this is not an action movie at all.
No,
And
but
that's what I find really interesting. All the set pieces, even the climactic one especially, that's the highlight, right? Where they play center man.
yes.
And Crown has all the other guys wearing the bowler hats and the trench coats, and they're carrying the briefcases. It's so cool. It's just so classy. The music is perfect. The pacing is perfect. It doesn't go on too long.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they were inspired by the red cap scene from the train station in North by Northwest, and it also is similar to The Heist, a 1989 film starring Pierce Brosnan, which takes place at a horse track, and it involves multiple men wearing Hawaiian shirts and straw hats. So really cool stuff.
We're going to talk about the next reason why it wasn't better very, very soon, but I feel like it's almost to the detriment to the rest of the film how well paced the heists were in the beginning and in the end of the film. Because then when you compare it to the middle, it feels a bit uneven. But I feel like that just speaks to the strength of how you open this film and then how they ended up concluding.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, and I guess that's going to bring us to the second reason why it wasn't better, the pacing. This film does drag a bit in parts, and I haven't talked about this with you yet, but I'm sure you found this. The opening heist, it's 20 minutes. It just takes way too long.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a huge chunk of the film. And it's cool. There's some cool stuff in it, but all of the guys, when they're disabling the air conditioner stuff, and there's the laser stuff. Once you've seen this movie once or twice, like I have, like you don't need to see any of that.
It's interesting because they become very inconsequential to the plot, but by focusing on them so much, especially having not seen it before, I couldn't help but think, oh, I wonder how they're going to be involved in the rest of the film. But at the same time, comparing that to the original Thomas Crown Affair opening, it's still much faster.
Yeah, that's true. The opening heist to the original film is what, like 30 minutes?
Yeah,
Maybe more?
it's longer. It feels a bit more disjointed. There's there's way too much focus on like kind of little details and interactions that I feel like films did back then, kind of including the in between motions that nowadays films just kind of cut out to allow audience imagination to fill the blanks.
Then there isn't really a scene in here where Crown or Banning are in any real mortal danger, right? Like
No.
there is a lack of tension in the film, but I had to remind myself midway through the film, it's just not that kind of movie. It's not an action movie at all. You could really argue it's just a romance movie, and it's set on the backdrop of this caper, right? It is really
Yeah.
about these two characters. Will they, won't they? It's a slow burning romance, and you get some art heist stuff sprinkled throughout.
Yeah, it almost feels like the Thomas Crown just is doing two like magic tricks for the audience, and you just want to see how he did it. And I feel like the reveal, especially watching the film as an adult, is very satisfying to see how they set it up, and then also how then the film is able to actually reveal how in layers it just lines up with the classiness of Thomas Crown.
That's the thing, right? It's classy. There's a slow burn to them that I think it works well for the film. But I can certainly understand the criticism of like that a lot of the scenes take too long to develop. And that's something you would probably not see in a more modern version of this. Like if this Michael B. Jordan remake gets made, I can almost guarantee you it's going to have way more action in it.
Well, I want to bet there's going to be even way more heists.
Yeah. I hope there's not guns.
Yeah, that feels like it would be unnecessary.
Did you notice how when he steals the Monet in the beginning, the painting's frame would have snapped if he had folded it into that briefcase?
I was trying to figure. I think I did enough mental gymnastics in my head that I had made it make sense. Like I almost thought, like, oh, he had a briefcase that was able to extend long enough to then fold into the painting.
No, so this is something that often gets brought up about the film. On the DVD commentary, McTiernan explains that there were more shots showing how the canvas would be folded without ruining the painting. The plan was to have the briefcase outfitted with knives that would precisely cut the frame without harming the canvas when the
Mhm.
briefcase gets closed. But all of this explaining, he felt slowed down the pacing of the scene too much. So they cut them out and they figured most people wouldn't notice that the briefcase was half the size of the painting. But of course, a lot of people have noticed this and commented on it
Yeah.
over the years.
Yeah, it's again, I tried to make sense of it in my head, but it makes sense that it shouldn't make sense. I will say though, like being someone that watched it for the first time, I can see what you're saying around the pacing feeling maybe a bit too slow in the beginning after you've already seen it once. But I really do appreciate just what they do to really set up that Thomas Crown is a cool, calculated guy that knows exactly what he's doing. It's so fun that he makes a habit of making friends with his staff. They know who he is. He always goes into that particular room to look at the haystacks painting. And
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it just all pays off so well.
Yeah, I think that's what probably works the best in this movie's favor, right? There doesn't really seem to be any plot holes. Everything that they show on screen has a purpose that there's a payoff for later. Like even the stuff with the mysterious woman that he's seen with, that pays off perfectly later. She's the forger. She's in what does Dennis Leary's character say? She was right in front of us the whole time. It's like
Yeah.
little stuff like that. It's all good writing, good direction.
Yes. I was gonna say, is it the right stuff?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that because the next reason why it wasn't better is the score, which is brought to us by the one, the only Bill Conti,
Pretty
who won an
legendary.
Oscar. Yeah, he is a legend. I will give him that. He won an Oscar for The Right Stuff, which is a great score. I would say he is a legendary film composer, but he can be inconsistent,
This
and
film
this
being
score is indicative of that. Did you know he scored a James Bond film?
yes, I did know that. For Your Eyes Only.
Yes. Are you familiar with his score to For Your Eyes Only?
Not as intimately.
It is some of the most bonkers music you will ever hear. It is bananas. I will send
Well,
you some after this.
Well, if I can only imagine with what we got with this film, because I can tell you, like, the score for this was a little all over the place.
It was. I like the jazz stuff a lot. When he sticks to the jazz and the piano, I like it. It's classy, it's timeless. You could play that at a cocktail party and it would really be a hit, right?
The tap rhythms were also
It's
really fun.
yeah. That's good. That's all good stuff. The stuff that plays during the opening heist, which, by the way, just reminding the listeners, takes a good 20 minutes, it clashes with the jazziness in a very bad way. It's like this bass heavy synth.
Hmm.
I don't even know how to describe it other than bass heavy synthy stuff.
Yeah, that's fair.
And whenever Rene Russo's character is on screen, it almost sounds like a porn, like music from a softcore porn movie on like
There's
Cinemax.
it's a really
You know
interesting,
what it
like,
reminded me of? The
yeah.
score to Never Say Never Again, which is a bad thing.
Think of a very synthesized horn, just
Yes.
and it's just play like very melodic, sensual theme. That's what whenever Rene Russo's character came on, so it just felt dated. That's all.
Yeah, very 90s. But I have to say, in Conti's defense, when he gets the score right, it is quite beautiful. Like the stuff that plays during the glider scene,
Yep.
it's really good. It's really pretty. It's very romantic. And the opening credits, the music there, I like. I like like I said, the trumpet stuff, the piano stuff,
Hmm.
all of that stuff works. But whenever he gets into the synth atmosphere of it all, it ain't great. And of course, his use of Sinnerman in the final heist it's cinematic perfection. That's a really awesome part of the soundtrack.
Oh my gosh, it was just so much like it really was an example of just how much music can really elevate a scene, right?
Oh yeah, they scored it perfectly. They really did. When who's the cop chasing him? It's Frankie Faison, right? He's the one who's like out on the museum floor chasing him
Yes.
around.
Yeah.
That's so great.
All the all of the confusion just because there's so many lookalikes all wearing the same bowler hat. It was great.
All the cops, especially Dennis Leary, and then of course Rene Russo too. That you can tell they're like 90% pissed off, but like they 10% think it's hilarious. What's happening?
Yeah, there was this scene where they're in like the eagle's nest in the Met. I would assume they were in the Met where they're all watching the cameras and then seeing Pierce Brosnan come in. I will say it kind of felt like that was a massive room with like it felt like 50 cops in one room.
Yeah, I guess some of them were like museum security too.
Right, that's fair.
And there's stuff about Rene Russo's character I think that's a little odd. When she basically steals his keys and has the guy break into his house and finds the painting, and then Dennis Leary's like, "How would this ever hold up in court?"
It's like it wouldn't.
Because she's just like, all I care about is the painting. It's like, but that's not a good answer to the question. But hey,
Well,
whatever.
she really does only care about the painting. She doesn't care about if Thomas Crown gets tried or not. As long as the painting
That's
is
true.
found, then she still gets paid out because then the insurance doesn't have to pay out on the painting.
Correct me if I'm wrong. All she's trying to do is create doubt so that the insurance company doesn't have to pay, right? Like that's pretty much it.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, okay. And if she happens to find the painting, she gets 5% of its value. So not bad.
Yeah, not bad, but I think like that was also they didn't make it the easiest you couldn't find that quite easily watching the film. I had to look into it a bit.
No. I guess it's not really important, I suppose, in the grand scheme of
No,
things.
at the end of the day, the important thing is that like that it's about her knowing Thomas Crown did it and him trying to convince her to just join him, be
Which he
with him,
does
which she does.
eventually. They're of course lost in the windmills of their mind. I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of that song. Even the Sting version of this for this film, it's fine because it's like a very famous song. It, of course, the original song from the original film. It won the Oscar. It's. I think it's a very dated sounding song.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
very, very, very late '60s. And the
agreed, very
windmills off
dated.
your mind.
But there wasn't a. I think like it was probably appropriate for the time.
Yeah, for sure. I did like the updated version of it. I don't know if you noticed, it's the song playing during the black and white ball.
Oh, I'm gonna have
That
to
like
rewatch
big
that. That's cool.
that like big band version that's playing when he's dancing with the smoking hot model and Rene Russo interrupts them.
Oh yeah, his ward.
Yes, his ward, which they, thank goodness they didn't go into that too much.
Yeah, it was a fast reveal. She actually is the one that can paint.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize it until the last time I watched it. She doesn't have any lines. She doesn't say anything.
No, I mean
She
Mark
was a real
Margolis.
model too.
Yeah, and Mark Margolis had a what? 3 lines? 4 lines?
If that. Last reason why this wasn't better, we wanted to talk about this. I do think this movie really ages well. There's like old school cell phones here and there, but overall, I think the film just works. The premise works. The characters work. I do think it got a bit lost in the shuffle of 1999, though. I think if this had come out a year before or after, it would have been better remembered.
I agree with you there. I think when especially looking at what did release in that same year,
It's a mega
it's
year.
hard. How do you stack up against that?
It's tough. I mean, let's just rattle some off here, right? This is all stuff that came out in 1999. The Matrix, Toy Story 2, The Sixth Sense, The Green Mile, Fight Club, Office Space, Eyes Wide Shut, The Talented Mr. Ripley, The Insider, The Mummy, Election, Magnolia, The Iron Giant, Entrapment, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, The World Is Not Enough, 10 Things I Hate About You, American Pie, The South Park Movie, Being John Malkovich, American Beauty, Tarzan, The Blair Witch Project, October Sky, Cruel Intentions. And who could forget Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and Wild Wild West.
I'm so glad you threw in Wild Wild West right there.
Well, I mean, it was a big deal at the time because Will Smith was in it, but
But like every single film that you just named, it's like fan bases that rabidly love those films.
yeah, I would say everything that I just named ranges from pretty famous to masterpiece.
Yeah, Iron Giant, that's definitely one that stands out for me.
The Matrix.
South Park movie.
Toy Story 2 is one of the greatest sequels ever made.
Being John Malkovich, one of the more avant-garde films I've ever seen.
Yeah, cool movie. Have you ever seen The Insider?
No, I haven't.
Ooh, then we're going to have to cover it.
Well, I will watch it.
Do you know anything about it?
I mean, I know that it's Pacino.
Yeah, it's Pacino and Russell Crowe. It got a bunch of Oscar nominations, but it completely bombed at the box office. Ooh, so that qualifies it for why wasn't it better. So it's in the wraps. We're going to cover it.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. I mean, you could put Office Space as a masterpiece, right? Maybe.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Yeah. Fight Club?
A lot.
The
So
Green Mile?
there's a lot of big films here. Okay, I
Yeah.
think it's a pretty amazing year. Again, it's no 2001, but it's still a pretty incredible year.
That's a good discussion we could have at some point. 2001 is a great year too. But you know what's aged the worst about 1999? American Beauty winning Best Picture.
Oh my gosh, that has aged horribly.
Yeah.
To be fair, 1999 also had some of the worst films I've ever seen. So
You
it's
don't need to
it's
mention them.
but I
We already
mean,
mentioned Wild Wild West.
well, but did you mention Baby Geniuses?
Never saw it, don't need to.
Dudley Do Right,
Oh, come on. You're dragging the bottom of the barrel now.
Inspector Gadget, Detroit Rock
Yeah,
City,
that's okay. All right. So it wasn't a perfect year.
yeah, Universal Soldier, The Return.
Oh, that doesn't even count. Was that direct to video?
No, that was in theaters.
Jeez. Say no more. I forgot Sleepy Hollow. That's a pretty cool movie.
Oh, that was a fun one. I think that was
Yeah, I kind of like
underappreciated.
Sleepy Hollow.
Well, it was better than Baby Geniuses.
I will take your word for it. Was it better than Phantom Menace?
Ooh.
As you know, our remake was perfectly legal.
And okay, so we haven't really talked about any of these kinds of films on the podcast because, well, you know, I don't think that they're in the same caliber of a lot of films that we've talked about. 1999, of course, has cult favorite Big Daddy.
Right? Yeah, yeah, I like that movie.
And like by all intents and purposes, like it's amazing how well that film did in the box office. I mean, it was just kind of a case study for like how Adam Sandler does well in films that he did in like the late 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, the budget for that thing, 35 million, box
I
office.
was gonna say, yeah, couldn't have been an expensive one.
Box office almost 235 million.
Impressive. Yeah, Adam Sandler, he was a big deal then.
Yeah, so
For sure.
1999, a lot of great films, and well, we named a few stinkers.
That's okay. There's stinkers every year. The point I wanted to make is that Thomas Crown Affair remake, you could say that it got lost in the shuffle of all these great films. Although it did do quite well for an R-rated caper film. You know, it made plenty of money.
Yeah, very unique film. Also, when you compare it to the rest of the films that
Yeah,
were great,
definitely.
I'd put it up
Yeah.
there because like it's not like any of those films.
No. So let's bring this home. Did we like it? Do you want to go first or after me?
I'm happy to go first. A very unique film that I'm thankful I watched it. It was really cool to be able to see Pierce Brosnan in at the peak of his career and seeing his chemistry with Rene Russo was just such a treat, and being able to just also see this lens and this beautiful view of New York City was just also enjoyable as well. So overall, like I had a really great time watching this film, really great time analyzing it, taking a look at a bit of the history. I think that if anything, it's still just a bit of the pacing that does it for me. Something that we talked about before is that even when you look at the original Thomas Crown film, the pacing there felt like, okay, this is definitely an older film with a pacing that just is a bit slow. And then even with this film, while a huge improvement, it still felt like it dragged in a few moments versus certain scenes where it was really able to drive it and kick it up a notch. And but at the end of the day, the payoff that you get with just how well the film really sets up its characters, sets up their objectives, their dreams and their aspirations, and how it all displays, it felt like I was front row at a magic show in Vegas, and you get to see the big reveal. So overall, I really enjoyed it. I think that it's definitely a film that I would revisit, and I'm going to go ahead and give this film a solid B.
Glad to hear it. Glad I was able to introduce this to you. It's always nice to spread the love of Thomas Crown. I like this film quite a bit. It's sleek, sexy, classy. It's got two brilliant performances from the leads. They have amazing chemistry together. It's a film where you could watch a sequel if they ever made one. I don't really know what the sequel to this would be, but if they had made it, I would have watched it. I think it's aged very well. It's got some really nice set pieces from John McTiernan. He was a great director in his day, and this was his last quality film, unfortunately. As far as remakes go, this has everything you could ask for, right? It does honor the original in all the right ways. I think it's an improvement on the original in almost every way. It keeps the core story and the elements, right? The chemistry between the two leads. It's stylish. It's got catchy music. It's got clever set pieces, but it manages to modernize it and bring something new to the table. It's basically the same movie, just with a modern twist. It's the same reason I thought the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot did well. And for me, it's the polar opposite of the 2001 Tim Burton Planet of the Apes remake. It is a rare remake that is superior to the original. I don't really love the original, as I have mentioned. I would probably give that a C. I know that's probably harsh because there's a lot of people that love that movie, but it's like we talked about it already, Anton. It's just way too slow for me to love. This one does have some pacing issues too. It's a little slow in parts, but overall, it just works for me in all the right ways, and it is absolutely a film that I enjoy revisiting every few years. I give it the same rating you do. This is a solid B for me.
Nice. I think we're both very, very fair. I think we both really looked at this with a very fair lens. And I encourage all of our listeners to give this film a try. Just like I encourage our listeners to watch most of the films we talk about.
Yeah, for sure. If you like Pierce Brosnan in any way, I think this is the best performance of his career that isn't James Bond. This is the best use of Pierce Brosnan in a non-Bond role. So
no doubt.
That's it for the Thomas Crown affair. Next week, Anton, speaking of James Bond, we're going to go back to James Bond officially. It's another Connery. It's You Only Live Twice.
Oh, man. I wonder what exotic locations we'll be traveling to get there.
Really only one. Technically two. Hong Kong and Japan. Bring it.
Well, get ready, folks, for some ninjas, for very curious questions that we have to ask ourselves about what were they doing back then. But
they didn't even know themselves. But you're going to get some ninja armies. You're going to get some volcanoes layers. And you're going to get nobody's favorite actor, Charles Gray. I lost that in Singapore in 42.
But don't forget, you're also going to get everyone's favorite Donald Pleasance.
Yeah, you will get Dr. Loomis as Blofeld, so keep your eyes peeled for that. So we will see you next time on Why Wasn't It Better? Take care.